What if I told you that almost everything you have eaten today has probably been genetically altered by humans? And I am not talking about some secret government experiment, no FEV spreading around, and no mad scientist playing God only get killed by his own creation in a profound twist of fate. I'm talking about something much more practical, selective breeding. I mentioned selective breeding in probably half of my food videos I made at this point. Corn, watermelon, tomatoes, bananas, all have been selectively bred. At this point, selective breeding is basically the co-host here, because no one is going to upstage me, not even my cat. But despite how much I brought up selective breeding, I've never actually explained what selective breeding is or how humans manage to completely transform plants and animals without understanding anything about DNA. So let's fix this. Selective breeding, also called artificial selection, is actually a pretty simple idea. You would take organisms that have traits you like and then reproduce. And then you do it again with their offspring. And then again and again and again. You don't need a laboratory, genetic engineering, or even understanding of genetics. Though evil laughter does help in my experience. You just need to look at your crops and think, this one is bigger, that one tastes better, that animal is less of a douchebag, let's make more of those. The important part is that the traits you're selecting for have to be at least partly heritable. If you have a plant that produces particularly large fruit, you can save its seeds and grow more plants from it. Then you select the biggest ones and breed those. Over generations, those small changes accumulate. One generation might look barely different from the previous one, but after hundreds or thousands of generations, the difference can be enormous. One of my best examples is corn. Modern corn came from a wild grass called teosinte, and if you see my video, you already know where this is going. Teosinte looks almost nothing like modern corn. It's small, has hard seeds, relatively few kernels. On the other hand, modern corn has huge ears packed with kernels. If you showed someone both without explaining the connection, they might reasonably think that you were making this shit up. But ancient farmers didn't wake up one morning and create modern corn. They simply kept choosing plants with traits they liked. Maybe one had slightly larger seeds, another had more kernels, another was easier to harvest. Those plants produced the next generation. Farmers selected from that generation and they repeated those plants produced the next generation. Farmers selected from that generation and they repeated the process. Eventually, a weird little grass became one of the most important crops on earth, which is honestly one hell of a gardening project. And corn isn't even the weirdest example because humans did this with dogs. Modern dogs all belong to the same species, but look at the differences between a Chihuahua, a Great Dane, a Dachshund, and a husky. At some point, humans looked at wolves and decided, yeah, I want one of those in my house. Then we spent thousands of years selecting for size, temperament, strength, speed, appearance, hunting ability, and herding ability. Eventually, we ended up with hundreds of breeds, which is impressive when you realize that the starting point was basically a wolf. Although some breeds make me question whether we were improving the wolf or just getting bored. And back to the dog thing, this is probably one of the easiest ways to understand selective breeding. Let's look at some actual breeds. Terriers were often bred to hunt rats and other small animals, so humans selectively selected traits like agility, speed, persistence, and ability to dig. Basically, if you had a rat problem, you want a dog that looked at a rat and thought, finally, something worth doing. Then you have fast dogs like greyhounds and Afghan hounds. They were developed for hunting and coursing, so speed and endurance were extremely valuable. Over generations, traits like long legs, relatively light bodies, deep chests, and long snouts became common. They're basically biological race cars. Meanwhile, I get winded walking a flight of stairs, so I clearly was bred for sitting at a desk and complaining. Bloodhounds are another great example. They were bred specifically for their extraordinary sense of smell and ability to follow trails over long distances. Their long ears and loose skin are also characteristic features of the breed. Humans basically looked at a dog and said, I need this animal to find something based on smell that happened here hours ago, and then spent generations making it better. And then there are breeds that were developed for guarding, protecting, and historically fighting. Pit bulls, for example, have a history of bull baiting and later dog fighting, while breeding favoring traits like athleticism, muscularity, determination, and the ability to grip and hold. Doberman, meanwhile, will develop primarily as protection and working dog, with traits like strength, alertness, courage, and responsiveness being particularly useful. These are different histories, but they demonstrate the same principle. Humans selected physical and behavioral traits that made a dog better suited for a particular job. Love how I'm talking about dog breeds and my cat's being a pain in the ass right now. Go annoy the dogs. I can go on forever listing breeds and the traits humans selected for, but the pattern is what matters. These dogs didn't randomly become really good at specific jobs. Humans repeatedly selected the traits that helped them perform those jobs, generation after generation, until those characteristics became much more common in the breed. And that's selective breeding in action. You find a useful trait, breed the animal or plant that have it, and keep doing it. Eventually end up with an animal or plant that is exceptionally good at something specific. Humanity basically looked at a wolf and said, I need one of those to hunt rats, one to chase things, one to track people, one to guard my house, and apparently one looks like a tiny moth. And selective breeding isn't just about making things bigger. Humans have selected for taste, color, texture, growth speed, disease resistance, temperature tolerance, and how much food a plant produces. Sometimes the goal isn't even to make food taste better. It might be to make it easier to harvest, transport, store, or protect from pests. This is one reason selective breeding is so important to human history. When humans began domesticating crops and livestock thousands of years ago, we weren't collecting for food, we were changing the population we depended on. Over generations, domesticated species became increasingly different from the wild relative, helping make permanent agriculture possible. More reliable food supplies meant larger settlements, more people, and eventually civilization. And the really impressive part is that humans were doing this long before anyone knew what a gene was. Farmers knew certain plants were better than others and that certain animals produce offspring with desirable traits. They didn't understand DNA chromosomes, they just understood one very simple principle. That one is better, make more of those. Now, selective breeding isn't perfect. Repeatedly breeding for specific traits can accidentally bring along traits you didn't want, and selecting from a small population can reduce genetic diversity. Modern breeding programs are much more complicated because scientists can track genetic traits and analyze DNA, but the basic principle is still surprisingly similar to what ancient farmers were doing. Choose traits you want, breed the organisms that have them, and repeat. And selective breeding is not the same thing as genetic engineering. With selective breeding, you're choosing which organisms reproduce and allowing their existing genetic variation to be passed on. Genetic engineering can directly alter an organism's DNA using biotechnology. Both can change organisms, but they are very different processes. And selective breeding isn't automatically natural either. Humans have been manipulating plants and animals for thousands of years. The tomato in your kitchen isn't some untouched piece of nature. Neither is corn, watermelon, berries, chickens, sheep. Humanity has been playing around with biology for a very long time. We just have much better tools for doing it now. So next time you eat watermelon, look at tomato, see a dog, walk past a field of corn, or anything you like, remember that you're looking at the result of generations of people making tiny decisions about which organisms were worth reproducing. Thousands of years of that one is better, keep that one, don't plant those, breed those two, and eventually you get something completely different. Which is probably why I keep bringing up selective breeding in my videos. Because once you understand it, you start seeing it everywhere. And that's the history and science of selective breeding. A story about agriculture, genetics, domestication, and humanity's remarkable ability to spend thousands of years looking at nature and saying, yeah, but I think I can improve that. And considering one of the things we created, we probably should have been supervised. Thank you, and as usual, like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments what food, ingredient, animal, or at this point, weird part of food history like we cover next.